Good day, friends. Welcome to our series on amazing discoveries. The search for light, truth, hope, and meaning. Today's topic is Darwin's black box. Can a scientific mind believe the Bible? The fifth line of evidence that we would like to look at comes from the fossil record itself. Friends, the fossils are found in various sedimentary rocks around our planet. And beautiful specimens have been found at various places on Earth. And scientists have worked out what they refer to as the geological column. And generally speaking, they will say that the simpler animals are found in the lower layers, whereas the more complex animals are found in the higher layers, animals such as the mammals and the birds. And so they have developed what they call trees of life, showing a gradual development from unicellular organisms on the left, in this case, to multicellular organisms. And eventually those gave rise to various invertebrate types. They in turn gave rise to the fish. The fish eventually started walking out onto land, became amphibious. The amphibians eventually gave rise to reptiles, the reptiles to mammals, and then within the mammals, the apes eventually gave rise to man. This, of course, took place over 300,000 million years. That is what the evolutionist would say. So let's have a look at the evidence. What does the evidence actually reveal? Time magazine, 4th December 1995. Evolution's Big Bang, evolving at supersonic speed when life exploded. We refer to this as the Cambrian Explosion. Friends, the Cambrian rocks are right at the bottom of the geological column. Within these rocks, we find an explosion of life. We find sponges, we find crinoids, we find jellyfish, we find trilobites. These are not simple organisms. In fact, there is no such thing as a simple organism. They are highly, highly complex. Now, if we are to go to the Precambrian rocks, the rocks underneath the Cambrian, we should see fossils showing the transition from unicellular organisms into these organisms that appear within the Cambrian. Friends, we have found no transitional forms. These animals appear suddenly within the fossil record, and some are beautifully preserved, like these trilobites. Just look at this beautiful specimen. And friends, they are highly complex arthropods. They have even found an arthropod eye fossil. In 2011, a discovery on Kangaroo Island, South Australia, provided another evolutionary misfit. Fossilized compound eyes were found in Cambrian layers, fully formed, with 8,000 individual segments arranged in tight hexagonal tubes. These shrimp eyes look just like today's fully formed arthropod eyes. Where does one find the sedimentary layers with fossils displaying many gradual changes between a simpler eyeless ancestral shrimp and shrimp with fully formed eyes? Friends, you will find it nowhere. These complex compound arthropod eyes appear suddenly in the oldest layers within the geological column. Within the Burgess Shale, which is the Cambrian, we find this creature, which is an onychophoran. It is dated by the evolutionists at 530 million years. But friends, we find onychophorans living today. Here is this little creature which is called Peripatus. It is an onychophoran and it doesn't look much different. Yet this animal was fully formed and appears suddenly within the Cambrian layer. We find complex worms in the lower Cambrian. George Gaylord Simpson, a very famous paleontologist, says it has been suggested that all animals are now specialized and that the generalized forms on which major evolutionary developments depend are absent. In fact, All animals have always been more or less specialized, and a rarely generalized living form is merely a myth or an abstraction. In other words, friends, there's no such thing as a simple form of life. All organisms are highly specialized. Here we see a fossil of a crab. It doesn't look much different to the crabs of today. Here is a fossil from the Jurassic period, dated by the evolutionist at 140 million years old. This is a beautiful specimen of a horseshoe crab. Here we see the horseshoe crabs as they appear today. Once again, friends, there is not much of a difference. They still look very much the same. Here we have a fossil of a prawn or a shrimp from the Permian, dated at 230 million years of age. Once again, friends, there is not much difference. Shrimps have always been shrimps. Prawns have always been prawns. Crayfish and lobsters have always been crayfish and lobsters. Here we see a fossil from the Jurassic period, dated at 168 million years by the evolutionists. These organisms are highly specialized. They are now extinct, but they appear suddenly within the fossil record, fully formed. Here we see a fossil of a starfish from the Ordovician period, dated at 450 million years. Friends, that is a starfish. You can immediately recognize it. It hasn't changed much. Where are the transitional forms that give rise to this organism? They have not been found. Here we have a fossil of a stalked crinoid. But on the right side of the slide, we see a modern crinoid. This fossil has been dated at 450 million years. But friends, it hasn't changed much. They appear suddenly within the fossil record. When it comes to the mollusks, here we see some from the Cretaceous period, dated at 110 million years. They look very similar to what we find today. The same is true of these fossils. Here too, we see some mollusks that look very similar to the ones that we find today. These are from the Eocene, dated at 55 to 80 million years of age. Let us go to this article, which was found in the Time magazine, 4th December 1995. We read, older textbooks proclaim that our phylum, the Chordata, did not appear until the Ordovician period, and that this later evolution must imply advanced status. But the Burgess shale contains a chordate, the genus Picaea. Now here, friends, we have a chordate within the Cambrian layer. This little fellow was called Picaea grossolens, and he is dated at 505 million years. Chordate in the oldest rocks of the earth. Now with myomeres, those are fish-like muscles, a nerve cord, a notochord, and a vascular or blood system all identified, this study clearly places Picaea as the planet's most primitive chordate. Here we see a reconstruction of this little fellow. And here is another reconstruction giving us some idea of what it looked like. The discovery of marvelously preserved soft-bodied Cambrian organisms at Zhenjiang in China has proved that full diversity was reached within the Cambrian explosion itself. In other words, all the major groups of animals were there. The discovery of a beautifully preserved chordate from the still earlier Zhenjiang fauna now seals the fate of this misguided effort in asserting specialness for our ancestry. Chordates arose in the Cambrian explosion, and many more chordates have been found. Here we find a little organism called Unanozoon levidum, dated at 525 million years. It has a notochord, in other words, a support structure or a backbone-like structure. In this case, a flexible, cartilaginous skeletal rod for support. Here's another chordate found within the Cambrian, Haecoella lanceolata. It has a heart, a dorsal and a ventral aorta, gill filaments, and a neural cord, once again dated at 525 million years ago, also found in China. And here is yet another chordate called Hycoichthyes, and the name tells you that it looks like or resembles a fish. It has fins, a notochord, myomeres, and gill pouches. And here is yet another chordate that has been found. Mylocunmingia, also very fish-like. And so, friends, we have this explosion of life within the Cambrian itself. Where are the intermediate forms in the underlying rocks showing us the development of these organisms? They are just not there. All of them appear suddenly within the creation record. Friends, that smacks of creation, not evolution. Here we see a beautifully preserved flying insect found in amber. The wings are beautifully preserved. Now, when it comes to the insects, the flying insects, wings appear suddenly within the fossil record. Where are the intermediate forms showing the development of little structures into wings? We have millions and millions and millions of years. There must be many fossils within the fossil record showing this gradual development, but it's just not there. When we see a flying insect, it is fully formed. The wings are fully formed. Here we see a fossil moth. The wings are fully formed. Here we see a fossil dragonfly dated at 140 million years. It's a beautifully preserved fossil. Notice the details in the wings, and the wings are fully formed. Friends, where are the intermediate forms showing the development of insect wings? Here is an amber fossil of an ant. It looks pretty much like the ants we see today. And here we have a little cartoon. And it says, "I can't believe it, Fred. 60 million years since I've seen you, and you haven't changed one bit." Dr. A.H. Clarke, in his book Zoogenesis, an evolutionist, says the following: "All the major groups of animals have maintained the same relationship to each other from the very first. Crustaceans have always been crustaceans. Echinoderms have always been echinoderms. And mollusks have always been mollusks. There is not the slightest evidence which supports any other view." You see, friends, that supports the model of creation. All the major kinds of animals were created by God. Yes, variation has taken place, microevolution has taken place, but all the major types of animals were there from the start. Here is a beautifully preserved fish from the Eocene period, dated at 50 million years. Here's another beautiful specimen. Here we have an example of a fossil fish graveyard. Many fish buried together. Now, friends, this indicates to us that these fish were buried rapidly by an underwater mudflow or a turbidite, like within the flood. Here we see a fish that was buried while he was busy swallowing another fish. There are many examples like this. Here's another one, a beautiful specimen. And here we have yet another example. These fish must have been buried rapidly by a turbidity current, an underwater mudflow. Let's have a look at the evolution of fish into amphibians. Here we see a reconstruction of a Reptidistian fish, that is, a fish with lobed fins. It is believed that a lobed fin fish gave rise to the amphibians, to an organism like this, which we call Ichthyostega, which was clearly an amphibian. And it is believed that these lobed fins developed slowly over time, and that this animal began walking onto the land and developed into an amphibious creature. But friends, if we look at Ichthyostega, it is very clearly an amphibian with legs that come off sideways, well-developed legs. Now let's have a look at one of these lobed fin fish. At one time, it was believed that it was a fish like a coelacanth, which is a lobed fin fish that gave rise to the amphibians. And we have fossils of the coelacanth, and they are dated at 380 million years. It was thought to be extinct for 150 million years. But then, within the last century, they caught a coelacanth right off the South African coast, near East London. The year was 1938, and Professor Smith from Rhodes University identified this creature. It was a major find. Yeah, this animal that was supposed to have been extinct for 150 million years was discovered, and he still looks more or less the same. Let's have a look at his lobe fins. On the right-hand side, you can see the structure of the bones within the fin. At the bottom, you see the structure of the limb of Ichthyostega. Now, friends, there's a big difference between those two limbs, between the fin and the limb. Where are the intermediate forms? Millions of years of evolution, there should be many fossils showing the slow development of the fin into the limb. We don't find them at all. And then in 2004, there was much excitement when they discovered this fossil, Tiktaalik, in Canada. This, they said, was the link between the fish and the amphibian. Here we see a reconstruction of Tiktaalik. It had lobe-like fins, and they believed that it began walking onto the mudflats and became amphibious. Well, as research continued, they found that the case was not so simple. For example, Alberg and Clack in Nature, 6th of April 2006, said the following: there remains a large morphological gap between them, that is, Tiktaalik, and digits as seen in, for example, Acanthostega. If the digits evolved from these distal bones, the process must have involved considerable developmental repatterning. Of course, there are still major gaps in the fossil record. In particular, we have almost no information about the step between Tiktaalik and the earliest tetrapods, when the anatomy underwent the most drastic change. Tiktaalik's fin was not connected to the main skeleton, so could not have supported its weight on land. The discoverers claim that this could have helped to prop up the body as the fish moved along a water bottom, but evolutionists had similar high hopes for the coelacanth fin. However, when a living coelacanth was discovered in 1938, the fins turned out not to be used for walking, but for deft maneuvering when swimming. You see, friends, these lobe-finned fish were beautifully designed for swimming in the water, not for walking on the land. What is more, in 2010, 6 years later, they discovered these fossil footprints, and when they dated them, they found them, according to evolution, they were found to be 18 million years older than Tiktaalik. So Tiktaalik could not have been the intermediate form. These were true tetrapod tracks. This was an animal that walked on all fours, like a reptile, as you can see in this slide. So the tetrapods were there long before Tiktaalik. When we look at other amphibians, like a frog, for example, in the fossil record, frogs appear suddenly. Here is a beautiful fossil from the Eocene period, dated at 55 million years. Where are the transitional forms? Frogs have always been frogs. Here we see a fossil of a plesiosaur and a reconstruction on the right. These were reptiles, say the evolutionists, that went back into the water. Now, there is considerable variety within the plesiosaurs, but where is the common ancestor that gave rise to these organisms, that show how a reptile developed fins or flippers from their legs? They just have not been found. Here are ichthyosaur fossils, and here we have the reconstruction of these creatures. They are also reptiles that supposedly went back into the water and developed flippers or fins. Now, once again, friends, there are many examples of ichthyosaur fossils, and they show great variety, but they are all ichthyosaurs. Where is the common ancestor that gave rise to these creatures? Where are the intermediate forms that show the development of those flippers over time? Here we have an incredible fossil showing an ichthyosaur giving birth. Now this once again, friends, shows that this creature must have been buried rapidly by an underwater mudflow. Here we clearly see this ichthyosaur mother giving birth to its baby. And then we come to the dinosaurs. Here we see a reconstruction of the Brontosaurus, now called Apatosaurus. It has been renamed. It belongs to the sauropods, which are the lizard-footed dinosaurs. There are many examples within this group. For example, here we have Brachiosaurus within the Berlin Museum. Friends, these were giant creatures, 16 meters tall, 25 meters long, and weighing 80 tons. Here is a reconstruction of a Brachiosaurus, and to give you the scale, here is a man standing next to it. I want you to notice on its head it has a dome-shaped structure. Its nostrils were not in the snout, it was at the tip of this dome. Now friends, once again there is tremendous variety within the sauropod group, but sauropods are sauropods. And when we look at Brachiosaurus, for example, there should be many intermediate forms showing the movement of the nostril from the tip to the top of this dome, but no intermediate form has been found. Here is another representation of Brachiosaurus with a dome shape on the top of its head. And friends, many of these sauropods are found in large fossil graveyards, as you can see in these slides. Many of them buried together as if floodwaters have swept them into possession, burying them rapidly. Here we have Tyrannosaurus rex, very, very famous dinosaur, a fierce-looking dinosaur. He is dated at 65 million years. But the amazing thing is, friends, that recently they have found dinosaur bones, T-Rex bones, with soft tissue and blood cells. They have found collagen fibers and red blood cells after the surrounding bone mineral had been dissolved away. And these collagen fibers were still flexible and they were resilient. They were fragments that were able to return to their original shape after stretching them. Here we see a Haversian canal and a scanning electron micrograph of red blood cells in T-Rex. Dr. Mary Schweitzer, who was examining this, said, and I quote, "It was like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones are after all 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long?" Friends, that's a very good question. How could any soft tissue survive for 65 million years? Maybe these dinosaurs were not so old after all. Here we see a fossil called Stegosaurus, an amazing dinosaur with these special plates on its back. Now, once again, there's lots of variety within this group, but they are all stegosaurs. How did they evolve? Where are the transitionary forms? Here we see Trachodon, the duck-billed dinosaur. Once again, how did that duck bill develop over time? The trachodons appear suddenly. Yes, there's variety, but they appear suddenly, and there are no transitionary forms showing the development of that duck bill. Here we see Triceratops with its 3 horns. Once again, there's variety within this group, but how did these animals evolve? There doesn't seem to be much within the fossil record. And here we see the pterosaurs. These were the so-called winged lizards. They had bat-like membranous wings consisting of skin, muscle, and other tissues. They had no feathers, they had hollow bones like birds, and they had an extended 4th digit to form the wing. The wings of flying reptiles extend along a 4th finger some 20 times longer than the other fingers. This interesting wing structure emerges suddenly and fully formed in the fossil record. There are no intermediate fossils indicating that this fourth finger evolved gradually. And here, friends, we have a beautifully preserved fossil bat. It is clearly a bat with beautiful wings. They appear suddenly within the fossil record. Now, once again, millions of years of evolution. There should be many, many fossils showing the development of these wings over time. Not one such transitionary form has been found. Bats appear fully formed within the fossil record. You see, the evolutionist refers to what is called homology, the similarity of the bones within the forelimb and the hind limb. For example, you will find the humerus, the radius, the ulna, the wrist bones, the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. But within each species, they are slightly different. But because the bones are similar, it is assumed that one has given rise to the other. A common ancestor is assumed, but the bones of the forelimb and the digits are coded for by different gene sequences in different animals. What is more, these different gene patterns are situated on different chromosomes. While there are morphological similarities between the different groups of animals, homology totally breaks down at the molecular level. Friends, just because different animals have similar bones in their forelimbs doesn't prove anything. For example, the car designed by Henry Ford is still basically a similar design to the cars we see today. They have 4 wheels, they have a steering wheel, they have headlamps, they have seats, they have an accelerator, they have a brake. Modern cars still follow Henry Ford's basic design because functionally it is a good design. If I see 2 houses that are very similar with just slight differences, as in this case, what does it tell me? It tells me that it has been designed by the same person, the same architect. It is functionally a good design. Let's come to the great sea mammals, the whales and the dolphins. According to the theory of evolution, the whales and dolphins would have developed from an ungulate, a mammal with hooves. And over time, this animal slowly made its way back into the water. And scientists have built up what they believe to be an evolutionary ladder, showing the development of a land mammal into a sea mammal. This is the creature they believe gave rise to the whales. It is called Pachycetus. And the reason they say this is because it is a hooved animal, and the bones in the inner ear and middle ear are in some ways similar to that within the cetaceans, that is, within the whales and the dolphins. This creature, Pachycetus, eventually developed into this animal that we see over here called Ambulocetus. You will notice that his digits are webbed, and he obviously was a fairly good swimmer and a hunter as you look at the teeth. This in turn gave rise to this creature called Rhodocetus. They had large forelimbs and hind limbs that could support the body on land, and it is likely that they lived amphibiously, but they did not have flukes. They did not have the tail fins that dolphins and whales have. Further research by Gingerich in 2003 has shown that Rhodocetus had trunk and limb proportions similar to foot-powered swimmers, and it used its tail mainly as a rudder. Gingerich concluded that Rhodocetus was swimming mostly at the surface by alternate strokes of its hind feet, and that it was insulated by fur rather than blubber, as in Durodon and the modern cetaceans. This made Rhodocetus buoyant and incapable of deep diving. And so here we see the transitional sequence, as you will find in any textbook today. Pachycetus at the top, then Rhodocetus, then Durodon, and then a true whale. But friends, where are the intermediate forms showing the development of the limbs of Pachycetus into the limbs that we see the webbed feet that we see in Rhodocetus, they have not been found. What is more, where is the development of the fluke from Rhodocetus into the fluke of Durodon, which is no doubt a true whale? It hasn't been found. There are no transitionary forms. But scientists will point to the little rudimentary limb that we find in Durodon. And they'll say, you see, the limb is disappearing. But they forget that this little limb is important to this organism for copulation. Muscles of the male reproductive system are attached to these bones to allow for copulation. In the female, the posterior gut and the gonads are attached to and supported by these bones. So they are functionally important. This does not mean that this animal was an intermediary between the two. Durodon and Basilosaurus were true whales. They just show normal variation within the gene pool. And then, of course, we need to consider the development of sonar echolocation. How did that evolve? Well, that's a whole story on its own. Where is the evolutionary evidence? Stephen Gould, probably one of the greatest evolutionists of all time, in his book Return of Hopeful Monsters, he says, the family trees that adorn our textbooks are based on inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of the fossils. What a frank statement from one of the world's leading evolutionists. And then we come to the evolution of the birds. In 1861, this beautiful fossil was discovered in Germany. Its name, Archaeopteryx. It was dated at 150 million years by the evolutionists, and it was believed to be the link between reptiles and birds. Why did they say this? Well, it had both reptilian and avian or bird-like characteristics. It had a toothed beak like a reptile, it had winged claws, and it had a long tail with many vertebrae. But it was also bird-like. It had an airfoil wing with beautiful contour feathers, and it had perching feet like modern birds. In this slide, top left, you can see the claws on its wings. Here is a reconstruction of Archaeopteryx. Does the presence of small teeth really prove anything? This could have just been a bird with small teeth in its mouth. After all, some fish have teeth, some don't. Some reptiles have teeth, some don't. Some mammals have teeth, some don't. Some amphibians have teeth, some don't. Some of you have teeth, some of you don't. So the presence or absence of teeth doesn't prove anything. What about the clawed wing? Well, there are some birds today that still have claws on their wings. Here we see the Hoatzin. Here is a young Hoatzin which has true claws on its wings. It uses them to hold on as it clambers around in the branches near its nest. The feathers found on Archaeopteryx were asymmetrical, and that suggests that this was a good flyer. The ostrich, rheas, and poor flyers such as the chicken have symmetrical feathers, not asymmetrical feathers. But what is more, friends, other birds have been found that are the same age as Archaeopteryx. In fact, one has been found that was dated at 225 million years. It was named Protoavis, meaning first bird. It was 75 million years older than Archaeopteryx. Its partly toothless jaw and keel-like breastbone were like those of modern birds. And then they found this creature called Sinosauropteryx. And the evolutionists became very excited because it was believed that they had filament-like feathers on their bodies. Here we see a reconstruction of this little organism dated at 130 million years. But friends, not all experts agree with this position. For example, Professor Alan Fiducia from the University of North Carolina is a bird expert. He examined these fossils and he said, new research shows that birds lack the embryonic thumb that dinosaurs had, suggesting that it is almost impossible for the species to be closely related. The hands of the theropod dinosaurs are derived from digits 1, 2, and 3, whereas the wings of birds, although they look alike in terms of structure, are derived from digits 2, 3, and 4. If birds were descended from the theropod dinosaurs, we would expect homologous structures to be derived from comparable regions. One could propose that bird wings were originally derived from digits 1, 2, and 3, but later developed another fourth digit, while the first digit regressed. However, there is no fossil evidence that this ever happened, and would be extremely unlikely since the bird wing was fully developed even in Archaeopteryx. Professor Fiducia went on to say theropod dinosaurs had a lizard-like pelvis that was distinct from a bird's frame. Dr. John Rubin, respiratory expert, Oregon State University, noted that Sinosauropteryx possessed a diaphragm separating the thoracic and abdominal cavities, similar to that in a crocodile. This would make the theropod dinosaurs unlikely candidates as ancestors of modern birds, which possess no diaphragm. It is virtually impossible for an animal that breathes by means of a diaphragm to evolve into an animal which breathes the way modern birds do, because the hypothetical intermediate creature would be severely hampered in its ability to breathe. You see, mammals have a diaphragm. Birds do not. They have a through-flow system with air sacs. And so gaseous exchange is able to take place during inhalation and exhalation because of the air sac system. The earliest stages in the derivation of the avian abdominal air sac system from a diaphragmatic ventilating ancestor would have necessitated selection for a diaphragmatic hernia or hole in taxa transitional between theropod and birds. Such a debilitating condition or serious handicap would have immediately compromised the entire pulmonary ventilatory apparatus and seems unlikely to have been of any selective advantage. A team led by John Rubin, an expert in respiratory physiology, analyzed fossil outlines of Sinosauropteryx's internal organs. Its bellow-like lungs could not have evolved into the high-performance lungs of modern birds. Such is the considered opinion of this expert in his field. John Rubin and ancient bird expert Larry Martin believe that the so-called feather traces are actually frayed collagen fibers beneath the skin. And if you look at the fossil, you can actually see they lie beneath the skin. The fact that the filaments are located within a clearly demarcated body outline, indicating the fibers were not external as they would be if they were feather-like structures, was completely ignored. Feather expert Alan Brush, University of Connecticut, points out that they lack the organization found in modern feathers. You see, friends, modern feathers are highly complex structures with shafts and barbs and interlocking barbules. Sinosauropteryx did not have that at all. From Science number 274, 1996, we read, "It's biophysically impossible to evolve flight from such large bipeds with foreshortened forelimbs and heavy balancing tails. Exactly the wrong anatomy for flight." The opponents of the theropod hypothesis refuse to propose an alternative hypothesis. This is probably because there are no other suitable candidates for avian ancestors. That is from Are Birds Really Dinosaurs? University of California, Berkeley. And then in 1995, this skeleton was found. It's the skeleton of Ornithomimus with preserved evidence of fossil feathers. It was found in Alberta, Canada. It was ostrich-like, dated at 75 million years by the evolutionists. Here we see a reconstruction of this creature. It had a toothless beak. It was too big to fly. Only adults had feathers on the forelimbs, suggesting that they were used for mating displays, not for flight at all. The data about these ornithomimids remains inconclusive. They may just be extinct birds, similar to the ostrich. Nothing about this specimen demonstrates the evolution of feathers or the evolution of birds. Here's another fossil that was found in 1998. It was called Chordates and was dated by the evolutionists at 124 million years. Professor Alan Fiducia disagrees and says that Chordates is not a theropod dinosaur, but a flightless bird. And then we have this beautiful fossil. A number have been found in the year 2000, 2003, and 2012. It has been named Microraptor. Please notice the beautiful feathers on both the forelimbs and the hind limbs. So here we have a creature that had contour feathers on both the forelimbs and the hind limbs. Here we have a reconstruction of this flying creature. The feathers on the hind limbs probably were used for aerodynamics to assist in flight. These extinct fossils tell us something about diversity among the ancient birds, but nothing about how birds could evolve from dinosaurs. Friends, this was simply a bird that had feathers both on its forelimbs and its hind limbs. In 2009, this fossil was found. It was named Amphibians huxleyi. It was found in northeast China and was dated by the evolutionists at 160 million years. It was similar to Archaeopteryx. They also had feathers on their hind limbs, and their feathers were symmetrical, which indicates that they were gliders, not active flyers. Amphibians, also called the four-winged bird, with feathers on its wings and hind limbs, represents a huge puzzle in terms of Darwinist theory. As they strive to account for the supposed evolution of two wings, Darwinists have to account for four wings, not observed in dinosaurs, nor flying squirrels, nor birds. This deals a severe blow to the Darwinist claim of evolution from bipedal dinosaurs. Amphibians is not a transitional fossil, but a species of bird. The fossil exhibits full avian features in terms of skull and general anatomy. Its wings and feathers appear to resemble today's species of birds. The feathers on their hind limbs do not function as wings, but may have been important for aerodynamics and for mating. And friends, if you want to see feathers on birds today, there we have it. These pigeons have feathers on their hind limbs as well. So this is something that is not unusual. And then in 2012, this creature was found, Uteranus hawley. It was also discovered in China. It was similar in size and shape to Tyrannosaurus rex. It was 9 meters long, it weighed more than 1.5 tons, and it was dated at 125 million years. Now, it is believed that these creatures had feather-like structures on their bodies. It was named the beautiful feathered tyrant, but it was far too big to fly. These were not contour feathers used for flight. Rather, it was believed that these down-like feathers were used for warmth to insulate these individuals during the cold or to attract a mate, but they certainly were not used for flying. Within 2015, this fossil was found. This was a bird-like creature. It was a big bird, now extinct, but preserved in the geologic record of the global flood. Friends, it is testimony to the avian diversity of the pre-flood world. This is simply an extinct bird. So what can we conclude? Firstly, the idea of proto-feathers, that is feather-like filaments, on dinosaurs has strengthened the resolve of many paleontologists that birds are direct descendants of the theropod, that is the lizard-hipped, three-toed dinosaurs. Even though these so-called feathers have been discovered on non-theropod dinosaurs as well. Secondly, there is ample evidence that some dinosaurs had a kind of downy fluff or fuzz that covered their body, which resembled feather-like filaments, but there were no contour feathers used for flight. Thirdly, the fossil record does not reveal an evolutionary progression in feather development, nor does it reveal transitional animals that are part bird and part dinosaur. So what are the problems with this theropod theory of bird evolution? Firstly, There are numerous reasons why dinosaur to bird evolution doesn't make logical sense. For example, dinosaurs, being reptiles, have scales which are folds in the epidermis. Birds have feathers which grow out of follicles. Feathers and scales are completely different in makeup and appearance. Secondly, there are no known fossils presenting a transitional stage of a scale to a feather. For this to happen, new genetic information would be necessary. Scientifically, the only way to change genetic information would be through a mutation. A major flaw in this theory is that mutations have never been recorded to increase genetic information. Rather, they reduce it. Thirdly, scales to feathers aren't the only characteristic needed for a dinosaur to evolve. It must also gain flight muscles, hollow bones, and a complex lung system. Fourthly, the digits in the forelimbs of theropod dinosaurs and those in the wings of birds are different. Birds have digits 2, 3, and 4 in their wings, unlike their supposed prehistoric counterparts. While the theropods lost digits 4 and 5, the birds lost digits 2 and 5. Through evolution, the theropods would have had to morphologically regenerate. While evolving into a bird, they would have lost digit 1 and then regain digit 4. Fifthly, the avian lung is structurally unlike any other organisms. Archaeopteryx had the classic avian through-flow lungs, dependent on both the parabronchi and the air sac system, while Sinosauropteryx clearly had a typical reptilian bellows lung. Sixthly, this poses a problem for evolution because there is no possible way for an avian lung to survive the gradual construction process with only certain parts. All three systems would have to be in full working order, and if not, the organism would not be able to survive. The vertebrate lung would not be able to evolve fast enough into an avian lung for an organism to live. And seventhly, what is more, contrary to evolutionary expectations, Sinosauropteryx was younger than Archaeopteryx. As Professor Fiducia likes to quip, you can't be older than your grandfather. Professor Fiducia went on to say, the theropod dinosaur origin of birds, in my opinion, will be the greatest embarrassment of paleontology of the 20th century. In 1999, this creature was discovered. It was called Archaeopteryx, and an article appeared in National Geographic explaining that this was a major link that was discovered. But later they found out that it was a hoax. It was bought on the black market. Different fossils were put together to make up this individual. So it was classified as a hoax. The idea of feathered dinosaurs and the theropod origin of birds is being actively promulgated by a cadre of zealous scientists acting in concert with certain editors of Nature and National Geographic, who themselves have become outspoken and highly biased proselytizers of the faith. Truth and careful scientific weighing of evidence have been among the first casualties in their program, which is now fast becoming one of the grandest scientific hoaxes of our age. Friends, when you look at a textbook showing evolution, you will always find dotted lines. Those intermediate forms have never been found. Here is another textbook showing dotted lines. What you clearly see here are major types. God created the major types. Yes, variation has taken place within the major types, but we do not see one type evolving into another type. What about the plants? Well, when you look at the fossil record, we find beautifully preserved fossils of ferns and other plants. Look at these beautifully preserved leaves. Once again, they appear suddenly within the fossil record. Dr. E.J. Corner, who is a botanist, said the following: much evidence can be adduced in favor of the theory of evolution from biology, biogeography, and paleontology. But I still think that to the unprejudiced, the fossil record of plants is in favor of special creation. What a frank statement. Charles Darwin, in his book Origin of the Species, said, "But as by this evolutionary theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth? That's a very good question, Darwin. Now, friends, that was 150 years ago. Since then, we have found huge numbers of fossils, but still, the intermediary fossils are missing. A.S. Romer, another famous paleontologist, said links are missing just where we most fervently desire them. And it is all too probable that many links will continue to be missing. George Gaylord Simpson from Harvard University, another famous paleontologist, he said the following: "It remains true, as every paleontologist knows, that most new species, genera, and families, and that nearly all new categories above the level of families appear in the record suddenly and are not led up to by known gradual, completely continuous transitional sequences." Stephen Jay Gould, who came up with the theory of punctuated equilibrium, said, "The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology." He went on to say, "The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. In any local area, a species does not arise gradually by the gradual transformation of its ancestors. It appears all at once and fully formed." What a frank admission by one of the great evolutionists within our modern world. Darwin was honest enough to admit to the reality and seriousness of the missing links, but hoped that they would be found with time. This convenient excuse, however, no longer offers any refuge for the evolutionist. Dr. George Neville remarks, "There is no need to apologize any longer for the poverty of the fossil record. In some ways, it has become almost unmanageably rich, and discovery is outpacing integration. But the fossil record nevertheless continues to be composed mostly of gaps." As A. Lunn put it, he said, "Faith is the substance of fossils hoped for, the evidence of links unseen." Friends, I'd like to close with this story from the life of another great paleontologist, Dr. Colin Patterson, from the British Museum of Natural History in London. Colin Patterson was a highly respected paleontologist, and he was sitting amongst one of the greatest fossil collections on our planet. He wrote a book on evolution, and one of his students wrote back to him and said, "Man, I really enjoyed your book, but don't you think it would have been helpful if you would have included a few photographs of transitional forms? Or if you don't actually have specimens, have an artist draw some of these intermediary forms." Dr. Patterson wrote back to him and said, "I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustrations of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any fossil or living, I certainly would have included them. You suggest that an artist should be asked to visualize such transformations. But where would he get the information from? I could not honestly provide it. And if I were to leave it to artistic license, would that not mislead the reader? Gould and the American Museum people are hard to contradict when they say there are no transitional fossils. You say that I should at least show a fossil from which each type of organism was derived. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one could make a watertight argument." Friends, what an honest confession by one of the world's leading paleontologists. Both creation and evolution are inferences, but the evidence, I believe, is overwhelmingly in favor of creation. The first verse in the Bible remains true. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And in the book of Revelation, God is calling the people of this world to worship Him as the awesome creator of all life. Shall we bow our heads in prayer? Gracious Heavenly Father, when we examine the evidence before us, we realize that life could not have come about by chance. We thank you for the order, the design, the complexity of life. And we bow down before you and we worship you as the awesome creator of the universe. Father, we pray that you will help us to be open and honest, that you will help us to search for truth. But when we examine all the evidence, it clearly points in one direction. We thank you that scientists are discovering more and more things that help us to realize that you are indeed an awesome God. We thank you also for Jesus, who was involved in creation. And we thank you that he has shown us that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And it is our desire to follow him. This is our humble prayer in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen.